Salutations, ladies and gentlemen, the Streaming Enderman here, back again with another video after quite a while. Again, apologies. Today we're taking a look at something very special. Now this may look like the box from the most recent video which you've seen, which would be this. Now, I was slightly critical of this knife, but at the same time I still really enjoy its overall aesthetic, and it's quite nice to carry. This is a different knife altogether. Same brand, however, same maker even, but different knife. Now, I'm sure if you've been in the Sheffield pocket knife community for more than 10 minutes, you've probably seen a whole bunch of videos of various knife reviewers talking about Taylor's Eyewitness Barlows. Yes, I'm talking about people such as Slick Slicers, Patty's Potato Peelers, Warthog, and the first example I can see, Stefan's Schmalhaus. But I'm a little late to the party, and I don't mind that. Today, I'll be taking a look at this. This is a Desert Ironwood Barlow knife by Taylor's Eyewitness. Now this knife I bought at the famous Sheffield shop. Again, amazing customer service. They even let me see the photos of the exact knives and let me choose the one I wanted. And it was a difficult decision between Amboina wood and Ironwood, but I went with the Ironwood, and this is the result. The camera probably can't pick up how nice this looks, but trust me, this is an incredible cut of wood. Just superb. But before taking a look at the knife itself, here's the box. Again, you get the Eyewitness Sheffield, England Premier Collection. And you get this little note in here. It says, craftsmanship alive. And if you wish to pause the video here, you can. And this was signed by Lee White. Now, this is, again, a different signature than the one on the Buffalo Barlow. By different, I mean it's the same person in the same style, but you can see these were handwritten notes. This is not a photocopied printout. Of course, this is, but the signature is an actual signature from the maker himself. So these knives, they are very high-end. It's not often that the maker himself writes his signature on the product or with the product. It just doesn't happen nowadays. Of course, then you have your care sheet, but aside from that, that's all there is to the packaging. Now, the knife itself. This is a very, very, very pretty knife. Is it the best user? That's a different story. Now, I'm going to be looking at this from 2 points of view. The collector, because let's be honest, if you're here just to buy a budget, inexpensive knife, you're not going to go for one of these. These are very high-end, they're expensive, and with polishing and embellishments such as this is not a knife that just any average person who just wants to bring one to work to abuse. This is not something they would buy at all. In many cases, I think that the collector is the only market they're catering to when making something like this. Of course, I can't confirm, I can't say that for certain. I'm just saying what it appears like. This is certainly not a hard use knife. It could be if you really wanted, but then you'd risk scratching the polish and it just wouldn't be nice. But let's have a look at this knife a bit more closely. So, as you can probably tell, This is a Barlow knife. Now, some people may not be acquainted with this shape, because to most, a Barlow is a teardrop shape, up and down, and it's perfectly symmetrical, often with a clip point or spear point blade. This is known as a British Barlow, and I'm just going off of what I've heard and seen. A British Barlow is slightly different, and for those who aren't aware, the Barlow was actually a Sheffield pattern. As many may have assumed, the Barlow came from America, because in the United States, Barlow knives have always been considered the American knife, right up there with the Buck 119 and the Buck 110. It's very much an American icon, right? And I think that I'd have to blame that partially on Tom Sawyer. Now, I would like to mention, in one of my previous videos, I said that the Barlow was talked about in Huckleberry Finn. I wasn't referring to Huckleberry Finn, I was referring to Tom Sawyer. I made a mistake. I'm sorry about that. But it was Tom Sawyer. And in Tom Sawyer, it is shown that Tom received a Barlow knife from his cousin, and as described, it was worth 12.5 cents. And that's most certainly not a very fancy knife. This, on the other hand, is. But ever since that remark in Tom Sawyer, it has been seen as an American knife, when actually it was invented in Sheffield by Obadiah Barlow in the late 1600s. And ever since, Barlows have been made in Sheffield, and one of the few brands that still makes them is Taylor's Eyewitness here. And this is just a stunning example of a Barlow. Again, most Barlows are seen as a symmetrical teardrop shape. This is not symmetrical. By that I mean, if you look, there's a slight curve in the handle. If I hold it this way, you can easily see it. It curves up. So it's almost like a reverse swayback, as opposed to a swayback, which is where the handle curves up slightly. This curves down. But that's one tendency you find on British Barlows. The next is the Bolster. Now, it has the traditional long Barlow bolster, but what makes it different in this scenario is most bolsters on a Barlow are rounded and often very smooth. By that I mean they aren't this more boxy shape. I don't know how to describe it better. As you can see, this is most certainly not a very smooth bolster. You can see it favors a more rectangular shape, as opposed to most, which are closer to an oval, I'd say. So most Barlow bolsters look more like this, right? Just straight, smooth, and symmetrical, while this is quite a bit different. You can see there are these curves at the side, and it dips down a little towards the front. Again, something you don't see every day in a Barlow. But let's talk fit and finish. Excuse me. The Desert Ironwood scales are very well assembled. The pins are incredibly smooth. They don't stick up at all. You can't even feel them. And transitions, a lot of people say, oh, transitions don't matter. Well, do they affect the function of the knife? Not really. Are they cosmetically pleasing if they are done correctly? Absolutely. The transitions here are beautifully smooth. You can't feel the transition. And we're going from steel bolster to an ironwood scale. That's a very smooth transition if you can hardly notice it. when you've got two materials that are entirely different. That's just very, very, very good quality. Same thing here, smooth pins, and the transitions are great. Let's have a look at the back. Now again, this has the beautiful embellished file work that we know and love. And fun fact, again, if you've watched a channel like Slick Slicers or Patty's Potato Peelers, you would know that this knife is made by Michael May, and Michael May used to work at Taylor's Eyewitness, and he used to make these Barlows. That is until he took an apprentice of his own, Mr. Lee White, and Lee White is the one who made this. So when you look at the different patterns on the backs of these knives, you can see that the file work has quite a lot in common. Very similar pattern going throughout. Granted, these are two different knives and are two different shapes, but you can really see the similarities, can't you? Almost identical. But I just thought that was an interesting detail. So, of course, we have the lovely file work, no gapping, and the way to tell if your knife has gapping if you aren't sure is if it has file work, open the blade, and then hold it up to the light. And if you hold it up to the light and you can see light going through, then that most likely means there's some minor gapping. I don't know if you can see, but there is some gapping in there. Very slight, but it's there nonetheless. This knife, which by the way, has a perfect half stop. And I think before I show the gapping, I have to mention something. This knife has a very unique opening mechanism that actually functions as a way to keep the knife cleaner. If you look at the top here, you can see that this is a perfectly flat blade. The back of the blade is completely flat, as opposed to Michael's, as you can see, and it's rounded. So there's a gap in there. Intentional, of course, it's not a flaw, but a lot of gunk can get in there. So if you put it in your pocket and there's lint in there, you can easily get a lot of stuff in here that's not good. Of course, it can be easily removed with, for example, a twin tip or even a toothpick, if you will. But again, it's annoying, right? This, while there is a slight gap up at the front, that is perfectly flat. And because of this, no dirt can get in. It does make for a strong pull, typical on Sheffield knives. I'd rate it about a 7.5. And when in half stop, you can see, again, no gap in there. You couldn't get any dirt in there because it's flat, as opposed to a knife like this one, which again, there's a space in there where you could get a lot of gunk. This, on the other hand, it's at the very top. So while yes, if you got some dirt on the top, you could just wipe it off. Very good design, if you ask me. Of course, here it is fully opened, and the gap test. Very, very, very tiny little bits of light getting through. I can see the back of the table, so there are some tiny gaps in there, but nothing too serious at all. In the meantime, now that the blade's open, the transition from spring to blade, very good. It looks like it dips down a little, but I believe that's intentional. I don't think that's a flaw. It feels very, very smooth. The blade, which I will wipe off just so there are no fingerprints. You can see this is a very aggressive clip point blade. I say aggressive not as a negative term, but more just simply describing the extent of the dip in the blade. For example, this, which is a clip point on one of one of Lee's Slim Barlows. The clip is there. You can very clearly see this is a clip point blade, but at the same time, it doesn't have such a deep swoosh in the front. Sorry if that was my only way to describe it, but it's a more gentle curve, as opposed to this, which has a very sharp curve in the front, and it makes for a very fine point. Very, very nice. Oh, looks like there's some gunk in here. One of the problems with these is when you oil them and then you open the knife and close it, some of the oil can get on the blade, and then when it's open, there's this kind of blade gunk up here. You may still be able to see some of it. But this is what the knife looks like fully open. It's not that big. I'll just do a quick comparison with the Slim Barlow. So, Slim Barlow is a bit longer, but it is also, well, slimmer. And while we're here, we'll do an example where we shall compare it to the Michael May jackknife. So you can see the Michael May jackknife is reasonably bigger. Again, the bolster is shorter, so you have more room for the handle. And the thickness is almost identical by the back. This knife is thicker at the front, but by the back, they're almost equal. This knife measures around 6 inches open, I believe. I shall grab a ruler. This is a very low quality ruler, but nonetheless, yeah, I was almost exactly right. It's roughly 6.2 inches. So, very nice size for a carry knife. Most certainly UK legal. I don't know about their laws. I believe it's over 3 inches in blade length is where a knife becomes illegal. Oh, and if any UK politicians are watching this video, I would like to remind you, knife crime isn't often being committed with small slip joint knives, or even lockbacks for that matter. They're committing them with kitchen knives, and, well, you allow those, which you should, so I don't see any reason not to have slightly larger pocket knives, but, you know, I'm not a lawyer. But that's a bit of a side rant, not necessary. In the meantime, though, again, the fit and finish is beautiful. Transitions are great, pins are flush, no gapping, transition to the blade is amazing. The stamping, which I almost forgot to mention, as you can see here, it says Witness Sheffield, England, with the I logo. Same here. I would have been mildly upset if the logo had only been on one bolster, but thankfully it's on both. And there is a logo also in here, and it says, let me just focus. Come on, you want to focus. Go ahead. Go ahead. There we are. Witness Sheffield, England. So you have 3 logos on this knife so far, and I know some people don't like having a logo on the bolster, but I think it works in this scenario very well. Comfort-wise, this is a very, very comfortable knife. The way that this curves down really fills the hand, and this unsharpened bit up here makes for a really nice finger choil. And the natural shape of the blade is just very nice to use. Makes for a great slicer. Speaking of which, you're probably wondering, there's going to be that one steel nut in the chat, in the comments, who's already asking what steel is this. Don't be too excited. This is not a high-end steel necessarily. It's 420HC. 420HC isn't bad by any means, but it's not, S35VN, S110V. It's not a super steel. It's an older steel, but it still gets the job done very well. If you are familiar with buck knives, you know they use 420HC, and their heat treatment actually makes it a very viable choice. Again, the one thing I know about steel, and I'm not very good with steel, is heat treatment makes the difference. Heat treatment really can change a steel. I've seen brands, or should I say heard of brands, that have managed to use things like AUS 6 and AUS 8, and they managed to make it really good with their heat treatment. And then I've heard of brands that managed to take S90V and make it garbage because their heat treatment just renders it almost useless. So, again, the heat treatment on this, I haven't heard much on, but I'm pretty sure it's high quality. After all, Sheffield has always been, and should always be, the #1 place for steel in the world. It's always been the city of steel. Been recognized as, in many cases, the birthplace of a lot of different types of steel, and in Sheffield they invented stainless steel. So, that is good. Very, very sharp. Actually, I'll do a test. Let me grab a sheet of paper right here. So, let's see how sharp the factory edge is on this Taylor's Eyewitness Barlow. Extremely sharp. Beautifully done. Beautifully done. This knife overall is very, very, very high quality. Now, I'm 23 minutes in, and I'm sure you're waiting for the end of the video, right? I've explained everything. Well, unfortunately, this knife can't escape the fact that it has 2 flaws. The first, blade scuffing. When you open and close a knife, you can feel tension in here. And it's not just the tension of the back spring. You can feel some scraping going on in there. And when you open the knife, even after you clean off the grease on the inside, you can see some noticeable blade scuffing. Look at that. That is, it's not a big deal, but I was kind of thinking, when you're paying this much for a knife, even the little flaws just seem much worse than they are. You can see that very clearly. That is a scuff mark. On this side, this one doesn't pick up as well. But there's a little bit of scuffing right there on the left. Again, not a huge deal. It's just, when you're buying a knife of this high of value, you're really wanting to make sure that it's perfect. It's not as bad as the scuffing on this knife. As you can see, there's some really bad scuffing right there. I still love this knife. In many cases, it's become one of my all-time favorites. That won't change. I really like this knife. If you haven't seen the video on this, please go watch it. It's a really, really, really nice knife. I'd recommend it to almost anyone. But even so, that knife over there is not quite, but about almost 2/3 of the price of this. So I can forgive some of the flaws on a slightly less expensive knife. But when you're paying this much, it's just a little hard to ignore said flaws. But the biggest problem for me, and this is something I hate in any knife I experience it with, is a bit of blade wobble. Now, I don't know what is considered blade wobble in the professional knife community. So I guess what would the term be? An open tag, if you will. I guess I will be asking for people who are watching this video, if someone watches this video, let me know in the comments. If you own high-end knives like this, if you own, 3 or more, 5 or more, 10 or more, or if you're slick slicers and you have almost 50 of them, let me know. What do you consider blade wobble? Because it's either that I consider even the slightest bit of movement blade wobble, because I'm sure that you probably can't even see any movement here. So I'm just wondering, am I the overly picky one who, if I notice even the slightest bit of movement, I immediately consider it a flaw? Even though it's just natural that when a knife opens, there has to be some movement left to right, otherwise you'll get terrible scratching, which is something I noticed. Some knives that have no movement at all left to right get terrible scratching because of how tightly the blade is pinched in between the bolsters. And I believe that's the case with this knife. The bolsters hold the blade together so tightly that every time it opens, it's scraping against them, and thus gaining that scuffing there. So the question is a little bit of movement fine, provided it's not noticeable? Because again, if you are here, you can feel a bit of movement, but you most certainly can't see it. So that's my question for all you knife folks out there. What do you consider too much blade wobble? What for you is something that whenever you pick up a knife and you fondle it, you just think, oh, if only it didn't have that much blade wobble? What would you consider? Because, again, it's either just me being overly picky and just a little bit of movement is completely fine as long as it isn't noticeable, or is it that all knives should be held together so tightly that they develop a bit of scuffing? What's your opinion on this? I'm curious to see. Let me know in the comments down below what you think. Because, again, I don't think any blade wobble's showing up here. But, I don't know. So, aside from the bit of scuffing and the slight movement in the blade, this is a perfect knife. The sharpening is great, the polish is immaculate, the logos are stamped wonderfully, transitions, pins are flush, everything is polished beautifully, even the brass shines really, really nicely. The cutoff at the back is perfect, and there's almost no gapping at all. The desert ironwood has a beautiful pattern that I just love. I'm glad I chose this one. It seems to have had the nicest of the three. There were 3 ironwood knives and 3 amboina at the famous Sheffield shop currently available. They're not made to order. They have them in their store, so if you order them, they will be shipped immediately. You don't have to wait for them to be made. They aren't made to order like Michael's knives. They are available. I know everyone buys from the Bakewell Cook Shop. I haven't bought anything from them yet. But if you want one of these, there are 2 of the ironwood ones left, as far as I know, and 3 of the amboina. They also have mother of pearl, stag, and I believe maybe buffalo horn. But go over to the famous Sheffield shop if you want one of these. Their customer service is unrivaled. Amazing people. Love doing business with them. But overall, I still love this knife. From the file work, to the shape of the blade, to the bolsters, to the wood, to the quality, even down to the box. It just feels perfect. It's a great knife. I mean, I can't deny that there are some tiny flaws that I wish weren't there, but even compared to this knife, which Lee White also made, doesn't feature the file work, the transitions are not that good. I mean, this is still a nice knife, by all means, but this is something new altogether. So, let me know what you think of this knife in the comments down below. Again, for all those people who have owned these, let me know what blade wobble you would consider to be too much. Are the blades so solid that if you try to move them, you cannot feel any movement at all? Or is there just the slightest bit of movement? Let me know. This video's gone on for far too long. I apologize for that. Again, let me know what you think of this video or the knife or anything for that matter in the comments down below. Like the video, share it with people who may be interested, subscribe to the channel, helps me out. We're on our way to 500 subscribers. Make sure to ring the notification bell if you don't want to miss one of my uploads, of which there are not many. And yeah, thank you very much for watching. This has been the Tailor's Eyewitness Desert Ironwood Barlow. Such a beautiful knife. And thank you for watching. This has been the Streaming Enderman, as always, signing off. Goodbye.